I found out I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner from a group photo my aunt posted on Facebook. Everyone was there. The tree, the ham, my mother's ugly red sweater she wears every single year. Every single person in my family was smiling in that picture. Except me. Because 3 days earlier, my own brother had quietly changed the locks on the house I grew up in, the house my father left to both of us, and nobody bothered to tell me until I drove 2 hours through the snow and stood on the porch like a stranger, ringing a doorbell that used to be mine. My name is Helen. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how my family tried to erase me so they could sell my father's house out from under me, and how one piece of paper, buried in a filing cabinet for 11 years, burned their entire plan to the ground. Before I go any further, if stories like this get your blood boiling the way they get mine, hit that like button right now and subscribe if you're new here, because trust me, you want to be here for the ending. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. I need to back up a little so you understand what we're dealing with here. My father, Walter, built that house himself, more or less. He bought the land in his 20s, poured the foundation with his own hands, and spent 30 years fixing it up piece by piece. It's not a mansion. It's a modest 4-bedroom colonial with a porch that creaks in exactly the right way and a kitchen that still smells like cinnamon no matter what you cook in it. It was the only stable thing in my childhood. My parents divorced when I was 9, and my mother, Linda, remarried a man named Walter. No, wait, let me say that again. My father's name was Walter, and my mother went on to marry someone else, a man I'll call Craig. My brother, Nolan, is my mother's son from her second marriage, so we're half siblings, though growing up nobody ever used that word out loud. We were just brother and sister. Or so I thought. My father passed away 2 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. He left the house to me and Nolan jointly, 50-50, written plainly in his will. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office holding my brother's hand, both of us crying, both of us agreeing that we would never sell it. We'd keep it in the family. Maybe fix it up and rent it out. Maybe one of us would live there someday. That was the plan. That was what we promised our father's memory, out loud, in that office, in front of a witness. For the first year after he died, things were fine. We split the property taxes. I drove up every few months to check on the pipes and mow the lawn when Nolan was too busy. My mother, who never lived in that house a day in her life, started showing up more and more, though. At first it was just to help sort through Dad's things. Then it became her stopping by with paint samples. Then it became her telling people at church that the house was going to need updating before it's ready to sell. Sell. A word nobody had used until she started using it. I should have paid closer attention. I was busy. I work as a claims adjuster. I was going through a divorce of my own that same year, and honestly, I trusted my brother. Nolan and I had our differences growing up, sibling stuff, nothing serious. He was always my mother's golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, and I was always the one who had to prove herself twice as hard for half the praise. But he was still my brother. I didn't think he'd do what he did. It started small. Text messages that went unanswered for days. A family group chat where plans would get made and then quietly changed after I'd already agreed to them. Then, in November, my mother mentioned, almost as a throwaway comment during a phone call, that Nolan had already talked to a realtor about the house, just to get a feel for the market. I asked her when this happened. She got vague. She said something like, "Oh, it was just casual. Don't make a thing of it." I made a thing of it. I called Nolan directly and asked him point blank if he was trying to sell our father's house without me. He denied it. He said Mom was exaggerating, that it was just a conversation, that nothing was official. He told me to relax. He told me I was being paranoid, that this was exactly why people didn't like dealing with me, because I always assumed the worst. I believed him. That's the part that still stings a little, even now. I believed my own brother when he looked me in the eye, well, over the phone, but you know what I mean, and told me I was imagining things. Then came Christmas. Every year since I was a little girl, Christmas Eve was at that house. Even after the divorce, even after everything, my father made sure of it. And even after he passed, we kept the tradition going because it felt like the one thing that still connected us to him. This past December, I made all my usual plans. I bought presents for my nephews. I picked out a dish to bring, a sweet potato casserole that was always my father's favorite. I even took the day off work early so I could beat the holiday traffic. Nobody told me the date had changed. I found out through that Facebook post. A photo posted by my aunt at 7 in the evening on December 23rd, a full day before I thought Christmas Eve was happening, which meant they'd deliberately moved the gathering up and never told me. Everyone smiling. My mother, my brother, his wife, my nephews, my aunt, my cousins. All of them, gathered in my father's living room, in front of my father's fireplace, celebrating a holiday that had defined my entire childhood, and I wasn't there. Nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody said, "Hey, we moved it, come on over." I called Nolan immediately. He didn't pick up. I called my mother. She picked up on the fourth ring and had the audacity to sound surprised that I was upset. She said, and I remember this word for word because I've replayed it in my head 100 times since, she said, "We didn't think you'd want to come, honestly, with everything going on with the house." Everything going on with the house. That was the first time anyone had admitted, out loud, that something was going on with the house. I drove up the next morning. 2 hours, through actual snow, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt because I needed answers and I wasn't going to get them over the phone. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was a small red and white sign staked into the front lawn, half covered in snow. A real estate sign. My father's house, my house, half of it anyway, already listed for sale, and I hadn't signed a single document. I marched up to that porch and rang the doorbell like I was a delivery driver instead of an owner. Nolan answered. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and told me that Mom thought it would be less stressful for everyone if we handled the sale without me getting emotional about it. He told me the realtor said the house would sell faster if it was staged and marketed properly, and that my sentimental attachment was going to tank the value. He told me, and I want you to really sit with this one, that he'd already found a buyer who was ready to close by February, and that my share of the proceeds would be wired to me once everything was finalized. As if I were a shareholder in a company being bought out, not a daughter losing her father's home. As if my consent was a formality he could skip. I asked him how he could possibly list a house that was half mine without my signature. He told me, very casually, that he'd gone to a lawyer, a family friend, one who apparently owed my mother a favor, and that there was a way around it since I hadn't been actively involved in maintaining the property. He implied, without quite saying it, that he was going to try to argue I had abandoned my interest, that I hadn't been present enough, that I didn't deserve an equal say. I stood on that porch in the cold with tears freezing on my face, and I told him this wasn't over. He laughed. He actually laughed and said, "What are you going to do, Helen? Hire a lawyer for a house that isn't even worth that much after the split?" Then he shut the door. My own brother shut my father's front door in my face on the day after Christmas, while my mother and the rest of the family sat inside eating leftovers. I sat in my car in that driveway for almost 20 minutes before I could even drive. And that's when something in me shifted from heartbroken to focused. Because I remembered something. Something small, something I almost forgot about entirely. 11 years ago, before my parents' divorce was even finalized, before my father remarried anyone, before any of this, my father had made me co-sign something. I was 21 at the time, fresh out of college, and I remember him sitting me down at that same kitchen table and telling me he wanted to make sure that no matter what happened with him and my mother, no matter who came in and out of his life afterward, that house would always, always be protected for me. He'd had it drawn up quietly, without telling anyone, not even his lawyer's whole office, just a trusted associate who filed it and kept it discreet. I drove straight to the county recorder's office the next business day. My hands were shaking as I requested the property records. And there it was, in black and white, filed and stamped over a decade earlier. A deed amendment establishing a right of survivorship and an irrevocable co-ownership clause specifically naming me, not the estate, not heirs, me by name. As a permanent co-owner with rights that could not be extinguished by any subsequent will, sale agreement, or family arrangement without my notarized consent. My father, bless him, had built me a legal fortress 11 years before he even knew he'd need it. It got better. Or worse, depending on which side of the family you were standing on. Because that same deed amendment included a clause my father had added almost as an afterthought, a clause his lawyer friend told me later he'd insisted on personally. If any co-owner attempted to sell, transfer, or encumber the property without the written consent of all named parties, the attempting party would forfeit their ownership share entirely, with that share reverting fully to the remaining co-owner. My father, apparently, had anticipated exactly this kind of betrayal. He didn't just protect my ownership. He'd built in a trap for anyone who tried to cut me out. I want to pause here and say, I didn't celebrate right away. I actually cried in the parking lot of that recorder's office because it meant my father, even in his final years, must have sensed that something like this could happen. He knew his second wife's family dynamics. He knew his son might not always act in my best interest. And he protected me anyway, quietly, without ever making it a big, dramatic conversation. He just did it and trusted it would be there if I ever needed it. I hired a real estate attorney that same week, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who read through the deed twice and then looked at me and said, "Helen, they don't just not have the right to sell this house without you. If they've already accepted an offer and signed anything, your brother may have just handed you the entire property." Turns out he had. Nolan had signed a preliminary purchase agreement with the buyer just 5 days before Christmas, listing himself as sole authorized seller and explicitly representing to the title company that he held full ownership rights to convey the property. That representation was false, and it was in writing, and it was notarized. My attorney explained that not only did this violate the terms of the original deed amendment, triggering the forfeiture clause, but it also potentially exposed Nolan to liability for fraudulent misrepresentation to the title company and the buyer, since he'd signed documents attesting to something that wasn't true. We sent the letter in early January. Not a phone call. Not a family meeting. A formal legal letter, delivered by certified mail to my brother, my mother, and the title company handling the sale, laying out the deed amendment, the forfeiture clause, and a demand that the sale be halted immediately pending review, along with formal notice that my brother's ownership share had reverted to me in full due to his unauthorized attempt to convey the property. The title company froze the transaction within 48 hours. Nobody wants to be caught closing on a house with a fraudulent representation of ownership attached to it. The buyer walked away entirely, understandably furious, and from what I heard through the grapevine, is now considering his own legal action against Nolan for wasting months of his time and nearly costing him a deposit. My mother called me 11 times in 3 days. I didn't answer a single one until the 4th day, when I finally picked up just to hear what she had to say. She didn't apologize. Not really. She said things like, "Your brother didn't mean any harm, and this is tearing the family apart, and my personal favorite, your father would be so disappointed in how you're handling this." I told her, very calmly, that my father handled this 11 years before any of it happened, and that I was simply following the instructions he left me. She didn't have a response to that. For the first time in my life, my mother was speechless on the phone with me, and I let the silence sit there for a long, long moment before I told her I needed to go. Nolan tried a different approach entirely. He showed up at my apartment unannounced about 2 weeks later, looking nothing like the confident, dismissive man who'd shut a door in my face on the day after Christmas. He looked tired. He asked if we could talk, and against my better judgment, I let him in. He apologized, sort of. He said he'd been under financial pressure, that he and his wife needed the money from the sale more than he'd let on, that Mom had been pushing him hard to move quickly because she wanted to help fund some renovations on her own house with the profits. He said he never meant to cut me out of Christmas specifically, that it just sort of happened because things were tense and nobody knew how to bring it up to me. I told him I appreciated him coming to say something in person, because that was more than he'd done on the porch. But I also told him that it just sort of happened doesn't explain changing the locks, doesn't explain hiding a real estate listing, and doesn't explain signing legal documents claiming sole ownership of a house he knew was half mine. I told him actions have consequences, and that the consequence of this particular action was that the house was now entirely, legally, permanently mine. Not out of spite. Out of exactly what the paperwork said would happen if he tried what he tried. He asked if there was any way I'd reconsider, maybe split the proceeds anyway out of family loyalty. I told him I'd think about it. And I did think about it for about 2 days. And then I decided against it, not because I wanted to punish him forever, but because trust, once it's broken like that, doesn't get repaired with a single uncomfortable conversation on my couch. It gets repaired with time, consistency, and actually showing up, not just when there's money on the table. So here's where things stand now, if you're wondering. I kept the house. I didn't sell it. I actually moved into it myself about 4 months ago. I fixed up the kitchen a little, kept my father's cinnamon-smelling cabinets exactly as they were, and I hung new curtains in the room that used to be my childhood bedroom. Some mornings I sit on that porch with my coffee, the same porch where my brother shut the door in my face, and I think about how close I came to losing this place because I trusted the wrong people to act in good faith. My relationship with my mother is distant now, mostly polite text messages on birthdays. My relationship with Nolan is slowly, carefully rebuilding, one small gesture at a time, though I'll admit I still keep my guard up more than I used to. And this Christmas, for the first time in 2 years, the tree in that living room is going to be decorated by me, in the house my father made absolutely sure would always, always belong to me too. If this story hit home for you, or if you've ever had family try to push you out of something that was rightfully yours, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Give this video a like if you believe people should protect what's theirs, subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and let me know in the comments where in the United States you're watching from tonight. I read every single comment, and I'll see you in the next story.